Hey everyone, welcome back. We're diving into something pretty wild today. Elon Musk suggesting Dogecoin could be used to audit the Federal Reserve.
Yeah, you got that right. It's cryptocurrency, government finance, and a whole lot of accountability questions swirling around.
Definitely a lot to unpack.
Uh-huh.
So to kick things off, maybe you can remind us a bit about Musk's history with the Fed. He's never been one to shy away from an opinion, right?
No, not at all. Musk has been pretty outspoken when it comes to criticizing the Fed. He's gone so far as to call their workforce bloated, basically implying they've got way too many people on the payroll.
Right. Yeah.
And he's also taken issue with their approach to monetary policy, especially when it comes to interest rates.
Okay, so for those of us who aren't financial experts, can you break down what monetary policy actually means?
Sure, think basically it refers to all the actions the Fed takes to influence the economy. Things like controlling how much money is out there and setting those interest rates we just mentioned. Gotcha. That helps clarify things a bit. And wasn't there also a pretty public back and forth between Musk and Jerome Powell, the current Fed chair?
Oh, yeah, there was. It
Yeah.
definitely grabbed everyone's attention. Musk doubled down on his claim that the Fed was absurdly overstaffed, and
Hmm.
Powell countered by defending the Fed's budgeting process, emphasizing that they're self-funded.
Hmm. Self-funded. So does that mean the Fed operates totally independently from the government then?
Not completely. It's a unique situation. The Fed is technically part of the U.S. government structure, but it does have a degree of independence in how it operates.
Okay.
And when Powell says self-funded, what he means is the Fed mostly covers its own operating costs with the interest it makes on the securities it owns.
Hold on a sec. Back up a little. What are securities exactly in this context?
Ah, good question. Think of securities as financial assets that represent some form of value. In the Fed's case, these are often U.S. Treasury bonds, essentially loans to the government. The Fed buys these bonds, and the government pays them interest on those loans. That interest income is what helps keep the lights on at the Fed, so to speak. And get this, any profits they make beyond their operating costs get sent right back to the U.S. Treasury.
So Musk's whole argument about the Fed being a burden on taxpayers might be a bit more nuanced than it seems at first glance.
You hit the nail on the head. It's not as straightforward as taxpayer dollars directly funding the Fed's every move.
Okay, so let's get back to this Dogecoin idea. Does Dogecoin actually have any real power to audit the Federal Reserve?
In reality, not really. In the U.S. government, audits are generally handled by the Government Accountability Office, or GAO. They do have the authority to look into certain aspects of the Fed's operations, but they're specifically prohibited from auditing monetary policy decisions.
Ah, so no chance of seeing a Dogecoin auditor army marching on the Fed then.
Well, that would be quite a sight. But realistically, no. The power to audit an institution as powerful as the Fed rests with very specific government bodies.
Right, so it sounds like Dogecoin auditing the Fed might be a bit of a fantasy, but one of our sources brought up the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE. Yes, another DOGE as a potential player in auditing the Fed. Could that actually work?
It's certainly an interesting thought, but we have to remember, even with a name like DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency isn't some independent force that can just decide to audit the Fed on a whim.
Right.
They operate within the larger structure of the U.S. government, and their actions are often guided by Congress and the president.
So Congress and the president would have to be on board for DOGE to actually take on the Fed.
Most likely, yes. Auditing the Federal Reserve would be a massive undertaking, and it would require a clear directive and full support from the branches of government that oversee DOGE.
All right, so we've established that getting the Fed audited, no matter who does it, is a pretty complicated process. But I'm still curious, why is auditing such a big deal in the first place? What's the point?
Well, think of it this way. Even the most successful, well-run companies out there have their finances audited regularly. It's considered standard practice to ensure transparency and accountability.
Okay, I follow you.
You want to make sure everything is running as it should be, that resources are being used properly, and that there's nothing shady going on.
Makes sense. It's like a checkup for a company's financial health. So are we basically saying we should be treating the Fed, this incredible, powerful institution that affects the entire economy, like a big company, and giving it a financial checkup?
You got it. And here's something else to consider. There was a video circulating where former Fed Chair Ben Bernanke actually had trouble accounting for $500 billion.
Whoa, wait a minute. $500 billion. That's a lot of money to just misplace.
Definitely raises some eyebrows, right? And it's especially interesting because Ben Bernanke served as Fed chair before Janet Yellen, who came before the current chair, Jerome Powell. It makes you wonder if there's a pattern of potential financial mismanagement within the Fed.
Okay, now this is starting to sound like a financial thriller. We've got misplaced trillions, calls for audits, Dogecoin. It's a lot to process.
Yeah.
A lot to process for sure. But I think it's important to remember this isn't just about some abstract financial stuff. The Fed's decisions actually have a real impact on people's lives.
Right. It's not just numbers on a spreadsheet.
Okay, so break that down for me. How did the Fed's actions actually affect the average person day to day?
Well, think about it this way. When the Fed decides to raise interest rates, that means borrowing money for things like a house or a car gets more expensive.
Ah, I
And
see.
when inflation goes up, the money in your pocket doesn't buy as much as it used to. The Fed's policies can literally influence things like whether or not you can afford to buy a home, how much your groceries cost, even the job market.
Wow, I never really thought about it like that. So this whole debate about auditing the Fed, it's really about making sure they're acting in the best interests of the people, right?
Exactly. It all comes down to transparency and accountability.
Yeah.
We need to know how these decisions are being made and whether they're being made with the well-being of the American people in mind.
But doesn't the Fed already have some level of oversight from Congress?
They do, but the level and scope of that oversight has been a point of contention for years.
How so?
Well, some people argue that the Fed has too much independence and that Congress needs to have more control over their actions,
Okay.
while others believe that the Fed needs to be able to operate without political interference.
So it's a balancing act between independence and accountability.
Exactly. And an independent audit could potentially shed some light on whether the Fed is striking that balance effectively.
You keep mentioning independent audits. How would that be different from the kind of oversight Congress already provides?
A good question. An independent audit would involve bringing in a third party, someone completely separate from the government, to examine the Fed's finances and operations.
Okay.
This would offer a more objective perspective and could potentially uncover issues that might be missed by internal reviews or even congressional oversight.
So like a fresh pair of eyes just to make sure everything's on the up and up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's not just about looking for wrongdoing either. Audits can also help identify areas for improvement, streamline processes, make sure resources are being used effectively. It's all about ensuring the Fed is operating as efficiently as possible, just like you'd want any organization to do.
Right, that makes sense. So even though Musk's suggestion of using Dogecoin to audit the Fed was kind of a joke, it did bring up some important questions about transparency and accountability.
Absolutely. It sparked a really important conversation. Whether or not Dogecoin is the answer, the fact that people are talking about the need for more scrutiny of the Fed, it's a really positive development.
We've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about Musk's criticisms, the Fed's structure, and funding the arguments for and against an independent audit. But I think the big question everyone's asking is, what does all this mean for me? Why should I even care about whether or not the Fed gets audited?
That's a fair question. And the answer is pretty simple. The Fed's decisions impact your life every single day.
Okay.
They influence the cost of borrowing money, the value of your savings, even the availability of jobs. Understanding how the Fed works and whether they're being held accountable is crucial for everyone, regardless of their financial background.
So it's about empowering ourselves as citizens, making sure we understand the forces that shape our economy.
Exactly. And it's about demanding that those in power, whether they're elected officials or the leaders of powerful institutions like the Fed, are held to the highest standards of transparency and accountability.
Powerful message. And I think it's a good place to leave our listeners with a final thought-provoking question. If even the most successful companies benefit from regular audits, shouldn't the Federal Reserve, with its enormous influence over the economy, be subject to that same level of scrutiny? That's a really good point. If we hold companies accountable, if we expect transparency from our elected officials, shouldn't the Federal Reserve, with all its power over the economy, be held to that same standard?
Yeah, it's something to think about.
Yeah.
And, the fact that we're even having this conversation shows how important it is to ask these questions and to challenge the status quo.
It is pretty amazing that this all started with Elon Musk, someone who's not exactly known for being a financial policy wonk, suggesting Dogecoin to audit the Fed.
Yeah.
Kind of a wild idea, but it definitely got people's attention.
Oh, we definitely did.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's how these important conversations get going. Someone throws out a crazy idea and it sparks curiosity, gets people thinking and debating. Suddenly, everyone's engaged with these complex topics they might not have even considered before.
It's like they say sometimes you need to think outside the box to really see the box clearly.
Exactly. And in this case, the Dogecoin thing, even though it's not really practical, it did highlight a real concern that I think a lot of people share. We want more transparency. We want more accountability from these powerful institutions like the Fed.
And we've seen that there are ways to potentially achieve that, whether it's through the GAO, the possibility of DOGE getting involved with Congress's support, or even independent audits.
Right, and each of those options has its own set of challenges and things to consider. But the main takeaway here is that the conversation has started. People are asking questions, they're demanding more transparency, and that's a huge step towards a more accountable and responsive financial system.
So what's next for our listeners who are now all fired up about this? What can they do to stay informed and engaged?
Well, first and foremost, keep asking those questions. Don't be afraid to really dig into these topics. Research different perspectives, form your own opinions. There's a ton of information out there online, from reliable news sources to educational websites.
Yeah, and don't underestimate the power of conversation. Talk to your friends, your family, your colleagues about these issues. Share what you've learned, debate different points of view. The more we discuss these things openly and honestly, the more informed and engaged we become as a society.
Absolutely. And remember, knowledge is power. The more we understand about how the financial system works, the better equipped we'll be to push for policies that benefit all of us.
Well said. This has been a really insightful deep dive, wouldn't you say? We started with Dogecoin, explored the world of the Federal Reserve, and ended up with a call to action for our listeners to be more informed and engaged citizens.
I agree. It's been a fascinating journey.
And on that note, we want to thank you for joining us on the deep dive. Until next time, keep those questions coming and never stop exploring.